SBRForum videos. I'm Peter Loshak. We are previewing UFC 167. Stacked card, awesome card. And our guests today are our returning guest, Nick Kalikas, MMA odds maker and a consultant for numerous sports books. And he, of course, is from MMAoddsbreaker.com. And we're also joined by MMA analyst and, more importantly, former UFC fighter Frank Trigg, who's been in the ring with all these guys already in his career. Frank and Nick, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having us.
All right, stacked card, huh? Great, awesome card. And of course, we're going to start with the featured fight, Johny Hendricks and GSP. Let's start with you, Frank Trigg. You know, you've been in the ring with GSP. And, the only thing, everyone's talking about this fight, basically they're saying, Johny Hendricks has, a round and a half, maybe 2 rounds to knock GSP out. If that doesn't happen, he's going to get gassed, and GSP will absolutely dominate him technically. The question is, what kind of a chance do you think Johny Hendricks really has to knock out GSP?
Johny Hendricks has more than a round and a half, 2 rounds to knock out GSP. Remember, Hendricks is one of those guys that even the 5th round, you're beating him up for 4 rounds, he still has 1 knockout power in his left hand, and he has stunning stopping power in his right hand. So you're looking at a guy that can still finish the fight in the 5th round, which makes GSP very, very scared because he's used to a guy that's going to throw a bunch of punches at him or going to try to maneuver him and try to out-hustle him. That's not what Hendricks is going to do. Hendricks is going to make this a brawl, a wrestling match, a tight inside, close, draw-out match, which is what Johnny's been doing for his entire life since he was 6 years old, is wrestling. And that's how this fight's going to end up going, is going to be on the inside, because the best way for GSP to beat Hendricks is to push him against the cage, tire him out, and bring him down. Johnny knows that, so Johnny spent a lot of time at Oklahoma State University with his former coach, John Smith, specifically learning how to go back and be a wrestler again, but use it for MMA. So I think Johnny's got a lot of time to go ahead and finish this fight. And to be honest with you, I actually think Johnny's going to win this fight. It's going to be a long, drawn-out decision.
All right, I hear you, but I feel like we've been in this position before, seeing guys who are like, have a good matchup, have a shot to beat GSP, and then we see how the fight turns out, and then in retrospect, we're like, man, GSP is just like a lot more dominant than we thought.
You're talking about guys that might be more, you're talking about Carlos Condit, because GSP has such a long layoff, but the reality of it is that Carlos has no wrestling offense. He wasn't taking GSP down, and GSP has, everybody knows, has such great defense when he's on top of somebody jiu-jitsu wise. He's not going to be able to submit him from the bottom. So that fight went the way that fight was going to go. Unless Condit cut him early, beat him up early, there was no way for Condit to beat GSP. So really these guys are talking about, GSP is not that good as them. This is a really tough matchup and all that. This is actually the first time a guy is ready and willing to wrestle GSP, just like he wants to wrestle, and ready and willing to punch him on his feet the way he's wanting to get punched. And when GSP takes him down, he won't be able to hold him down. So this matchup is completely different than what other people are thinking about.
Yeah, look, I have to agree with you. I mean, Hendricks has, faced very good welterweights, beaten them all. His wrestling is great. His power obviously is awesome. GSP has, an average chin, let's say. I don't know if we'll say suspect. We'll say average chin. Nick Kalikas, what kind of action are you seeing on this fight?
Well, a little bit more love's coming in on Hendricks at this point, and I'm not really that surprised because, GSP with the injury, he's bounced back. He's won his fights, but he hasn't done that in an impressive fashion. Now, even in his last fight, though, he was a little banged up coming into that fight, so he wasn't 100%. But there's still, I think, evidence of a decline out there, and a lot of people are banking on that. And with Hendricks is wrestling, like Frank just pointed out, in his knockout power, I think a lot of people believe this is the time that GSP is probably going to get beat.
Right now, the line is that I'm seeing is GSP minus 240, Hendricks plus 200, which is kind of like one of the lowest lines that we've seen in recent years for GSP. Where'd you open this line?
I opened the line around minus 260, so it's holding kind of steady here. But again, it's the factor that GSP hasn't looked the same. He's coming in off of injuries, and he's just not the same GSP that we're used to. But what is the same is he has faced the best of the division year after year. He's cleaned out the division, has faced wrestlers with power. I mean, let's not forget about Loshak, amongst others. So he's been in this situation before, basically facing guys that have that knockout power and have wrestling. I actually believe the GSP's wrestling is better than Hendricks. Maybe not on paper, but in the octagon, I think that's the case. His cardio is also better than Hendricks. So this is a fight that a lot of people are probably maybe underestimating GSP in.
Frank Trigg, let's talk about the Loshak fight for a second. GSP turned Loshak pretty one-dimensional. Do you think that that's a comparable fight?
It is a comparable fight, but the difference is that Loshak doesn't have that one-punch knockout power from a left-handed stance the way that Johnny does. Johnny's got a much better left-handed stance, knockout power, unorthodox boxing stance, knockout power. Plus, Loshak's style of wrestling in MMA, he wasn't using his wrestling as much because he could knock people out and he could beat them up on their feet. He became like a typical wrestler. You're not going to be able to take me down and hold me down, so let me go ahead and knock you out on your feet, and that's what was happening a lot for Loshak. Hendricks is not that guy. Hendricks is very smart. He understands that you're not going to be able to knock out a guy like GSP on the feet, even though it is a combo matchup, comparing the Koscheck and the Johny Hendricks fight. Johnny is smarter because he learned from that fight. He's a much better fighter when it comes down to getting ready for GSP.
All right, so it sounds like you're leaning pretty strongly towards, Hendricks at plus 200. Do you think there's any way if Hendricks wins that it actually goes a distance, or do you think that if he does win, it's almost definitely going to be by knockout?
I'm saying he goes by the distance for me. I don't see him being able to knock out GSP because GSP knows that left hand is coming, and every time he throws that left hand, he's going to be very, very guarded. It's going to be very difficult to catch him that left hand even late in the rounds. So I think it's going to be a decision, but I think Johnny's going to win. 3 out of the first 4, and the 5th will be a mix-up.
Wow.
But I think Johnny's going to win a decisive decision. Probably, like you said earlier, everyone's worrying about him getting his cardio shape because it's the first time in a big 5-round fight. I think he'll start having a coast come the 4th round and 5th round, but he'll come out, he'll control the pace the first, win the 2nd, win the 3rd, probably win the 4th, and then the 5th round will be a toss-up.
That's a bold prediction because most people are saying that, there's no way Hendricks will outpoint GSP, that if he wins, it'll be, inside the distance. But you seem to, so your pick on this fight would just be Johny Hendricks plus 200.
Yes.
Wow. All right. Nick Kalikas, who are you going to wind up needing in this fight, you think?
We'll probably end up needing GSP because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of backers coming in on banking on the knockout power. And Frank made a lot of good points comparing Johny Hendricks and Josh, obviously Koscheck in his fight before that. I mean, they are a little bit different, even though they both have knockout power. The southpaw does matter a little bit too. So and this is a better spot I think for Hendricks to come in at and possibly get that KO. But I do disagree. I don't see this fight really playing out because I've always been concerned with Hendricks's cardio, like all have been, really, like people are saying. So to me, until he proves it, until I can see him actually go 5 rounds with the likes of a GSP, I'm not going to be sold on his cardio. So I'm actually leaning a little bit more towards maybe GSP stopping it if it does go into later rounds. If he survives early, I think it is going to probably finish, but it's going to be St-Pierre getting in position and getting a must-needed finish. He hasn't had one for a long time either, so people could be surprised by it. But at the same time, it's one of those situations where I think a lot of people could be right. Hendricks has nasty power. I mean, look at his knockout against Kidman. That was unreal. I mean, it almost looked fake because he just plastered him that much. So he's got that kind of special KO power, and GSP has shown a little bit of vulnerability when it comes to the chin, as you mentioned before.
Right. All right, Frank Trigg, what about Hendricks' cardio? Do you think that's going to come into play at all?
I talked to him quite a bit yesterday, just trying to check up on him and see how he's doing. He is here in Las Vegas already, getting ready for this fight. He came in early. There's a bunch of media that he has to do that's extra for this fight. And he has been in shape and ready to go a lot earlier than most times in this fight. He's already down the weight. He's already comfortable at weight. Not that he's not sucking weight at this point. He's already at a very, very comfortable weight. It's much lower. He spent a lot of time at Oklahoma State University wrestling. And so I'm not as concerned about his cardio as I used to be in fights before this. When I was preparing Martin Kampmann to get ready to fight Johny Hendricks, we knew that Martin had to push him into the late in the 2nd and early in the 3rd because Johnny would start to fade because he uses a lot of power in his punches. Now I've talked to Johnny. I talked to him about it. He knows. His team knows. His coaching staff knows that he's got a bad issue of using so much power early in the fight, he can't make it last through to the end of the 3rd round. And he starts to fade. Well, he's fixed that issue by starting, instead of having a normal 2-month training camp, he's had a 3-month training camp getting ready for GSP so he can spend more time wrestling, getting his arms ready, getting his back and shoulders ready, get that constant pull, that constant punching, but also spending time making sure that he's in the best cardio shape he can possibly be, getting ready for a 25-minute war. So I'm not as concerned as his cardio as I was in the past, just because I talked to him and I talked to his coaches, and I've seen what they've done and I know what they're trying to do with him. But remember, it's still Johny Hendricks. It's still the first time he's been in a major fight, 4 or 5 rounds. Those championship rounds always make a difference. But I still think he's going to be able to pull it off.
Man, there you go. The inside scoop. So Nick Kalikas, I mean, where do you think this line's going to close then? Do you think it's going to close right where it is? Do you think it's actually going to get even lower, maybe like GSP minus 200?
It could drop to GSP minus 200 or below. I could see that. It could also climb up to minus 300. So if there's some serious parlay action that starts coming in. So, it's going to probably stay. I would think the smart move would be to stay about ballpark where it is now, around 2.5 to 1 or so, because it's going to kind of counterbalance both. But I think a lot of the heavier action is going to come in on Johny Hendricks. I mean, a lot of the straight plays, a lot of the big max bets, 5K or more, will probably end up dropping that line at some point because they're going to believe in that knockout power. They're going to believe in his wrestling, and they're going to believe he can come through.
Well, Frank Trigg is very clear in his opinion on this fight. He likes Johny Hendricks plus 200. Nick Kalikas, if you had to bet this fight, what would you take?
right now I would probably avoid it. Now there might be a premium play on a total or maybe inside something like that. So there's various different ways we could bet this fight. But as far as a straight play, it's a risky bet as far as laying the juice on a GSP against Hendricks, I think. So it's kind of a dog or pass situation. Either go with the underdog money in Hendricks, or I think don't lay the straight juice unless you mix it up in some other ways.
I think the consensus here is, in general, it's either Johny Hendricks at plus 200 or nothing. Great preview, guys. Thanks.